Want to welcome, want to welcome Monte Pearson. You're with 350, and I don't know if you're with other groups too, but I think of you as Mr. Fix the Grid. A lot of knowledge and a lot of patience. So welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I am a member of 350, and I am the liaison between 350 and Fix the Grid. So I have been doing 350 for a number of years and Fix the Grid for 2.5 so far. And I'm glad to have an audience to talk with. Glad to see you all again. I think some of you were here last year when I gave a presentation. So what I'm going to do tonight is I'm going to focus on the electric grid and not about climate change. I figure a group like you knows pretty much what climate change is about, and it's been in the news all summer. So we're sort of coming to the top in terms of, how public policy is going to work out. Good. So I love this picture, by the way, because it does give you a sense of how the wind industry has developed. You could see that little ship down there, which would probably be a nice thing to have in your dockyard. And it looks tiny compared to these things. I've read descriptions of them now, and these windmills are literally enormous, enormous. So we know that the Paris Agreement in 2016 said that we need to beat climate change by cutting CO2 emissions in half by 2030. And we need heat pumps in our homes. We need drivers in electric cars. And we need thousands of miles of electrified commuter rail. And to get that, we must replace all of our fossil fuel electric power plants with huge amounts of solar and wind power plus batteries for storage to drive this new, bigger electric grid. It won't do us any good to do all of these other electric things if we don't have an electric grid that's also clean. So how exactly can we do that? Let me click on my little button here. There we go. So before the 1990s, the electric grid was set up so that each utility had an area where it had a monopoly on providing electric power. And the utilities had power plants, they had transmission lines, and they had the individual lines running down the streets, and change the voltage at various times to ensure that. But it was a very much a monopoly in that sense. And to break down that and to create lower costs, there was a lot of talk in the 1990s about using the free market and deregulating. And in the end, there was a compromise where the utilities were allowed to continue to control transmission and distribution, but that the generation of electricity would be done by privatized, investor-owned generators who had to bid to sell electricity in a newly created kind of open auction-based market. And the utility-owned transmission lines would be open to all. Everyone would be paid the same rate for getting their electricity transitioned around. So the sector that we're looking at now is very much a market-based thing. Not only do these electric plants sell electricity to utilities, but they also directly sell to individual large consumers. And the typical one is a college, a university. Most universities will have a special deal with a couple of power plants to power their set. And they don't go through they're not served by any of the electricity utilities. They have this direct contract system. Now, in order to have some order out of this new system, they set up something called ISOs, Independent System Operators, and they're in various regions. The regions that are blank here are regions where the setup is so complicated that I can't really, we have to go into a 10-minute discussion just to explain how that worked out. But you'll see that large parts of the kind of industrialized part of the country is covered by ISOs. Now, ISO New England is located in Holyoke, and a big part of their work is manage the daily up and down of electricity usage all over New England. And this is the computer screen they work with. And I won't even begin to attempt to tell you what that might be about.
Wow.
Sorry. ISO is very concerned about energy reliability using this computer type system to manage the amount of electricity there is in all of the electrical wires. And they also are responsible for acquiring future capacity. They have a 3-year bidding process, and they ask for people, they say, we're going to have a 10% increase in the amount of electricity that we need 3 years from now. And so we need for folks to bid to fill that need. And what happens is that all the different power providers provide their bids, and ISO is supposed to come up with the most energy efficient, the cheapest package. And that process is very problematic, and I'll get into that in a little bit. Whoops. Boy. Now, the ISO New England is governed by something called NEPOOL. And NEPOOL has the role of verifying major decisions by ISO New England staff and board. And unfortunately, as part of the deregulation deal, NEPOOL is dominated by the power generator companies and by the utilities and by electric equipment suppliers. You'll see here that in terms of voting members, over on the left, there are 12 generation members and 5 transmission members as utilities, and 128 suppliers. And way over here at 41 are representatives of the 15 million people in New England who are clients, customers of this system. And when it comes to a vote, they vote in blocks. Each of these blocks has a vote. And so all of the 15 million people in New England get 1 vote, while the 12 generating companies also get 1 vote, and the 5 utilities get 1 vote. So you can see that the system is not set up very democratically. Now, what that means is that the ISO staff and management consists of lawyers and economists and engineers and other specialists who are pretty much oriented towards cost-effective management of the existing natural gas and nuclear power dominated electric system. And the board of directors is similarly closed and oriented towards natural gas and nuclear power. The board of directors selects its own replacements. So if a member of the 11-member board of directors leaves, the rest of the members, the 10 remaining members, get to choose who the new person is going to become. So that's not exactly an open system that allows very much new ideas in. And you tend to have a whole lot of people who, in one way or another, used to be executives in oil companies or professors of engineering who worked on hydraulic engineering in college and worked as consultants for utility companies. So you can see that there's not much variety on the board. In addition, the board of directors is closed in the sense that it doesn't have public meetings. So no one really knows what goes on at the public meetings. We get minutes from those meetings, but we don't see the discussions or anything like that. Presentations, we don't really see the presentations either. The outcome is, as you would probably guess, about 48%. The most recent data is that about 48% of ISO's electric generate power is generated by fracked natural gas from Pennsylvania and other states in the Midwest. About 27% is nuclear power from the remaining nuclear power plants in New England. 8% is hydropower. That will go up a little bit if they ever finish the hydro line through Maine. And only small amounts are renewable wind and solar power. And the problem is this is a recent book on the topic. ISOs increasingly use their control over market rules to erect impediments to progress on clean energy. And in large part because the industry members that dominate the stakeholder process are voting on their profits and their continuing existence. So they're not excited about the idea of replacing gas power with wind power, because that's their business. And ISO then has a focus on reliability and growth in electric supply that leaves out almost all other objectives. And while on one hand, the thing is that ISO, because it's at the top of the electricity pyramid, is considered the expert agency. And when it has this myopic focus, it not only has that internally, it projects that image to other people. So it tells other members of the industry and the regulators in all the state governments that we need this, we need this, we need this, we don't want that. And one of the things they don't want is they don't want wind power and solar power, because as they always say, the sun doesn't shine at night and the wind doesn't blow. And I'm trying to remember whether the wind doesn't blow in the winter or in the summer. It varies back and forth depending on what their argument is. But those kind of arguments trickle down through the decision-making system and influence decision makers at the state and local levels. Now, there are a couple, I'll just give you a couple examples of that. One is that ISO New England is extremely resistant to batteries, and it leads to them having peaker plants, such as the one, this is the Mystic peaker plant in Chelsea, or maybe it's not in Chelsea, maybe it's in East Boston, something like that. And they were given $400 million to stay open so that they could be used as a peaker plant for 2 years. That was all ratepayer money that was used for that. Meanwhile, I think that you've all heard about the peaker plant in Peabody that's being built. Brand new, it's 2024, folks, and out there somewhere is people building a new power plant that's going to be fueled by natural gas. It really is a shocking kind of thing, and people just plowed ahead and did it. And ISO New England is kind of behind that, backing up that kind of move. Meanwhile, in Australia, if I was really good with online stuff, I would send this to you. But in Australia, there is a huge coal plant that there was very dramatic footage of the Canadian government the Australian government blowing it up, everything collapsing, and they're going to build the world's largest battery to stabilize the grid in the area around Sydney, Australia. So in Australia, they are blowing up coal plants, and in New England, they're building natural gas plants. So that's a contrast that we have with some other places in the world. Let me get this thing is really small. So another example is that each fall, ISO asks electric power producers to submit a bid saying how much power and at what price it could provide it 3 years in the future. And the last process that I can figure out from their really complicated website occurred in 2019. And people were bidding for power that was going to come online this year, 2023. And because of the rules that ISO has put together for running this supposedly market-based free bidding system, only 5% of the energy that will come on board this year will be energy resources like solar and wind power. All the rest of it will be other things. Now, state governments have noticed this, and are not very happy about it. And so they have three things that you've probably heard about. And now we're going to start getting into the things that people are talking about doing with the system right now. The first thing is there's something called Renewable Portfolio Standard. And these are mandates that the state legislatures do that require the utilities to acquire a certain percentage of renewable energy. And that percentage is going up slowly over the next 10 years in order and pushing out dirty electric power. But it's happening relatively slowly. But it is something that you'll hear about when people talk about the amount of energy that people are using and where it's coming from. Another thing is that state legislatures have done is something called net metering, and it allows you to put solar panels on your house, and you get compensated for the energy you provide into the system. I don't know about you folks, but I have solar power in my house. I can't take credit for it because my wife said, we need to do this. I said, no, it's too complicated, but she pushed it through. And it's great. We're getting electricity for free 8 months out of the year.
Yep, that's true.
I think most everybody now, especially with the new tax incentives from the federal government, can work that kind of system. Because if you were putting out a lot of electricity and that's about the same amount as you use in your house, you end up paying nothing for the electricity.
Wow.
Final thing is mandating wind power. And what that means is that the states have said, we're going to bypass ISO New England and we're going to contract directly with a wind power company, mostly offshore wind. And the first one is coming out, is being built now and is being set up off of Martha's Vineyard. And we'll begin producing energy and sending it to New England this fall. And what the Massachusetts did, and Connecticut's picked up on it and doing it also, is they said, you build this power, and we tell our two utilities, our electric utilities, that they have to take this power first before they can take power from ISO. So these folks get priority into it. So that's how we have offshore wind power, folks. Not because ISO New England has talked about, oh, well, we need to get this transition started. Nothing like that. There is no offshore wind power that ISO has sponsored. It's being done directly by the states. And it was very clear at the last meeting that I was at in June that the state, that Massachusetts and Connecticut have decided to just bypass ISO New England on this issue and contract out their own stuff and work it out themselves. So it's a real interesting situation. They're basically end running the current electric grid that we have. So,
Monty, question?
Yeah.
How can they bypass ISO New England? They are connecting to the grid, right? Or are they building
Well, they're
the whole...
connecting the grid through the utilities.
Oh.
Because remember, the utilities own the transmission lines.
I see.
ISO doesn't own the, and so that when the electricity comes from, these offshore wind things, it comes into Eversource's electric grid, and they take it in as part of their system that they're using. And they have, I couldn't explain how, but they have ways of monitoring how electricity comes into the system and, who pays for what and things like that. And they're required by the state to take that electricity first. So what happens is that the reason these folks can put together a wind farm is that they have a guaranteed market. They don't have to worry about whether ISO will let them put energy on the grid. The state of Massachusetts said, everything you generate, you can sell. So that's why these companies are working on that.
Thank you.
So, the things that I've talked about are, not hidden, and a lot of people know about it. And so those people have come together and created the Fix the Grid campaign. And it's a regional network of community groups and statewide advocacy groups, and who want to get the grid fixed. And we also respect the right of those groups to do things that they want to and have priorities of their own. So it's not a coalition in the sense that we all do the same thing. It's a campaign that we all participate in as one of our activities. So what are some of the solutions? One of the solutions for these problems is more oversight of ISO New England. And that involves pressuring states to be more involved in ISO New England decisions. And the states at various times get up the energy to put a little pressure on ISO New England and criticize them. And on the screen there, you see that there was a letter from the governors in 2020 that criticized ISO and got a lot of publicity. It is limited in their what they can do, because the ISO system that was set up in the 1990s is a federal system. So ISO New England is a federal agency, and the state of Massachusetts can't pass any laws telling ISO New England what to do. Just like the state of Massachusetts can't pass a law telling the Defense Department to invade Peru. We just don't have that. States don't have that power. It's the same kind of situation. And instead they're governed by something called FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. And as part of the compromise that was done in the 1990s, there are 5 commissioners, and either 2 or 3 of the commissioners are always Republicans. And one of the controversies recently is that FERC now only has 2 Republicans and 2 Democrats, because Senator Manchin, one of our leading senators, refused to reappoint the 3rd Democrat. And that means that the commission is deadlocked, and Manchin won't allow anyone else to be appointed to the board until he gets his natural gas, his coal pipeline, or liquid coal pipeline, I think it is, in West Virginia. And until that's authorized, he's going to block having somebody on that. So you can't expect FERC to do a whole lot of exciting things with that. The other solution is to not worry about individual issues, and to reform the power structure of ISO New England. And that means changing the voting system of NEPOOL. It means having each of the governors have an appointed person on the 11-person board. If there were 6 representative of governors, they would be the majority on the 11-person board, and the board would be then much more responsive to the politics of the New England states. And FERC is unlikely to push having these kinds of changes, but the states could force this on ISO New England by doing things like what the state's doing now, or what Massachusetts and Connecticut are doing, which is going ahead and getting electric power outside of the ISO system. They also are they have the power to withdraw from the system as well. So even though they don't have the right to tell the system what to do, if they decide that they don't like it and they want to form their own ISO, and the governor of Connecticut has already threatened to do that. He wants to form an alliance with Massachusetts. And Connecticut and Massachusetts have about 70% of the use about 70% of the electric power in New England. So it's a big deal that Connecticut and Massachusetts are both pushing on ISO. So ISO is in a situation where it has gone in the last 3 years from being a place that nobody knows about to being a place that's in the headlines frequently. If you read the Boston Globe, you know that there are stories about it, there are editorials about it. I even got a letter to the editor about it earlier in the year. And so there's a lot of stuff swirling around it right now. So we are insisting that the New England governors have appointees, where we think that Gordon Van Whaley, who is the CEO for the last 20 years, is very much tied to the natural gas system and ought to be leaving. So a person who's dedicated to this tremendous task of putting in renewables. And we think that the ISO mission statement should be changed. Now, let me try to focus here. And let me just tell you briefly about the 4 things that I've discovered that are going on that you folks could get involved in. One is the winter storm problem. If you've been watching, you know that in Texas 2 years ago, there was a tremendous failure of the electric system, primarily that the natural gas plants and the natural gas pipelines froze up. And you know that, and you might not know, but the same thing happened in the Midwest last Christmas, and they almost had a giant blackout that would have covered New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and Ohio. There was also a potential blackout in New England last Christmas that they were able to avoid. And what happened is this. There has been because of that, well, let me go back. Because of that, those failures, that has freaked out people everywhere, because the idea of having the electric system go down in the middle of the winter during a storm is not good. And is way beyond what systems should be doing. And so there's been a lot of talk about how to solve that. And the Republican way of doing that, the industry way of doing that, is to build more natural gas pipelines all around the country and put in more infrastructure and build up the natural gas infrastructure. And they FERC, the Republicans on FERC, have been pressing New England to build more pipelines, so get more fracked gas from Pennsylvania. However, this spring, for the first time, ISO New England did a study about how much power is being generated in the winter, and they discovered that the reason they didn't have any crisis last winter is that there's so much solar power coming into the system that they had plenty of electricity last Christmas. And they said there's so much solar power being put on the system, primarily by individuals, that there's no likelihood of New England running short in the winter anytime soon. And several industry guys were shocked that the sun shone during the winter. That was the only way I could interpret it. It was they were just sort of like, how could that be? And it shows that people, once they start issuing propaganda, started believing their own propaganda. They've been saying that the sun doesn't shine in the winter for so long now that they now think that the sun never shines in the winter, and we all know that that's not the way it works. So we've been saved from that, and a new emphasis on solar power, I think, is going to happen throughout the region. Another thing that's come up that you might have heard with electric cars is that people who criticize bringing in electric cars have said, well, what good does it do to have electric cars if the system that's providing it is all nuclear power and natural gas and coal? And that criticism, ironically, has put a lot more pressure on the ISO to change. And the good news about the wind farms is that there's a new one coming in this fall. And the bad news is that there are some wind companies that have had to go to rebid because of inflation, that they couldn't make any money on what they bid. And they had to basically say, well, we're going to have to drop our bid. And so Massachusetts is going to have to think about its bidding process and not squeeze people quite so tightly. And finally, there are 2 new commissioners at the Department of Public Works, and they are going to start allowing more community aggregation to go on. I hope that Steve Winter is here still, and that he has told the group about community aggregation. It is a tremendous way to move ahead. So those are the things that have been happening in the last year. I just want to say that the amount of controversy and discussion and public events and things like that around the electric grid has grown enormously just in the last few years. And so it is a cause for hope. And if we can just prevent the climate from collapsing on us, we might be able to change this system. And I would recommend that somebody from this group come to our monthly meetings of Fix the Grid and report back to you folks on it, because you would be in on a whole lot of really important things going on with climate in Massachusetts and other places if you were in on Fix the Grid activities. All you had to do was come to the monthly meeting. And we have a website now that has a lot of interesting stuff on it as well. So any questions or comments?
Oh, Monty, there is a question in the chat.
Yeah.
What is a peaker for, and what to do to change the standard system, I guess.
Okay. The peaker plant, the deal is that if you think about it, each day different amounts of electricity are used. And some days, like during the summer, when everybody's got their air conditioning on, the amount of electricity used goes way up. And it literally goes up more. There's more demand for electricity than the system is set up to provide for that particular day. And so when that happens, there is a need for extra power to be pumped into the system so that there's enough electricity, because the grid can't work like at a deficit.